All right, diving in. Today, it's natural law. We're going to be looking at some academic excerpts, and they get into some pretty deep questions, like, is there a law outside of, like, the rules we make as humans?
Yeah.
What about things like natural rights and justice? How do those concepts fit into this whole framework?
Right.
And why should any of this matter to, well, to you, really, listening in today's world?
Well, and I think what's interesting to start with is that natural law isn't really a set of, like rules,
Yeah.
like you'd find in a law book. It's
Yeah.
more about understanding the inherent kind of order of things in the world,
Mhm.
particularly when it comes to humans and how we, interact.
So not a, like, rule book, but an order.
Yeah.
That's an interesting distinction. Could you give us a helpful analogy here just to kind of illustrate this idea a little bit?
Sure, sure. Think about the human body.
Okay.
There's a natural order to how our bodies work.
Right.
We don't have to, consciously think about all the intricate processes that are happening inside of us.
Right.
Just ADS.
That's a good point. I never really thought about it that way. So you're saying that similar to our bodies, there's an inherent order to how humans interact with each other and with the world around them.
Exactly. And the rules that we create, laws and social norms, those are kind of like our attempts to understand and, codify that natural order.
Okay.
But they're not the order itself. They're just, our interpretations of it.
That's fascinating. But it also raises a question for me. If this natural law isn't a rule book,
Yeah.
does that mean it doesn't really have any impact on us? Like, is it just kind of this abstract philosophical idea?
Well, that's where things get really thought-provoking. And the source material actually makes this point. Just because something doesn't have, like a clear set of commands doesn't mean it's not significant.
Right.
So in other words, whether you, subscribe to the idea of natural law or not, just by understanding the concept, it can actually change how you perceive things.
Okay.
Like, like laws and how societies are structured.
Okay.
It can offer a whole new perspective.
I'm starting to see how this could be relevant. It's like a whole new framework for understanding the world.
Yeah.
And speaking of frameworks,
Right.
the source also talks about this debate between natural law and something called legal positivism.
Yeah.
Can you help us understand what that's all about? What is legal positivism?
So legal positivists, they focus on man-made laws.
Okay.
The ones that are created and enforced by, authorities,
Right.
like governments and courts.
Okay.
For them, law only exists when it's, written down and it has the power of the state behind it.
So they're looking at the practical, enforceable side of things. But the source points out that there's this interesting distinction when it comes to natural law. It says that the idea of separating what is from what ought to be
Right.
applies to man-made laws, but not to natural law. Yeah.
So what does that mean exactly?
Well, it means that for positivists, laws are about what we decide should be the case.
All right.
We should have laws against stealing because it benefits society.
Okay.
But for natural law theorists, the order simply yes.
Okay.
It's not about what we think should be, but about, understanding those underlying patterns of how things actually work.
Gotcha. So two very different ways of approaching this idea of law.
Right.
One is about creating rules for a desired outcome.
Yeah,
The other one is about observing an existing order.
exactly.
Okay. Before we get too lost in the theoretical weeds here,
Okay.
the source brings up this interesting concept of natural persons.
Right.
What's that all about?
So natural persons, as they're described in this text, are essentially like the building blocks of the human world.
Okay.
They are beings who are capable of rational thought and action,
Okay.
meaning they can, make choices and speak for themselves. So not just any human is considered a natural person.
Right. The source gives examples like infants or individuals with severe disabilities that prevent them from, expressing this rational agency.
Okay.
They wouldn't fall under this definition.
Okay.
It also raises the interesting point that a deceased person, under certain circumstances, might still be considered a person
Oh, wow.
if there's a living representative acting on their behalf,
Okay.
like carrying out the terms of their will.
Okay.
So, kind of continuing their agency.
Yeah. That really challenges how we think about personhood and rights, doesn't it? I mean, it's a really complex topic with no easy answers.
It is.
And it leads us to another key concept from the source, which is natural rights. And this is where things start to get, I think, really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are these natural rights all about, and why should we care?
Well, the source explains that natural rights are rooted in um, what is inherently within a person's control, things they can do without, requiring permission from someone else.
So things that are naturally ours to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm having a hard time picturing what that might look like. Do you have a good example from the source material? Something relatable?
Sure. So the source uses this very simple but I think effective example: wiggling your ears.
Okay.
If you can wiggle your ears, that's something you can do without anyone else's involvement.
Right.
That's a natural, right?
If you can do.
At least if you have the ability. Yeah.
Okay. I see what you're getting at. So it's about actions or abilities that are inherently ours, not granted by someone else.
Yeah.
But how does this tie into the bigger picture of natural law?
Well, the source makes this connection.
Yeah.
It says that if we accept the idea of natural persons, then the idea of natural rights logically follows.
Okay.
If we are beings who are capable of, independent thought and action, then there must be certain things that are inherently within, our sphere of control,
Yeah.
regardless of what, any laws or rules might say.
That has some pretty significant implications for how we think about the role of government and the whole idea of individual freedom, right?
Definitely.
It's like there's a level of autonomy that exists
Yeah.
beyond the reach of any authority.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the source material goes even deeper into this.
Okay.
It actually dives into the etymology of some key words, communius, rex, and lex, arguing that understanding the origins of these words can unlock a deeper understanding of how we, interact and organize ourselves as humans.
Ooh, I love a good word origin story. What can these words tell us about the different ways humans, engage with each other, basically?
So, Harius,
Okay.
which comes from the Latin word meaning to swear,
Okay.
represents interactions that are based on kind of mutual agreement and commitment. Think of things like, contracts,
Well,
promises, oaths. It's about, voluntary interactions between individuals.
it's about relationships that are built on like trust and shared understanding.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. What about Rex?
So rex comes from the Latin for to rule, and it represents interactions based on one person having control over another.
Okay.
or their possessions. It embodies the concept of hierarchy and power dynamics.
Like a king ruling his subjects.
Exactly.
Or a parent having authority over their child.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and what about Lex?
So lex stems from the Latin word meaning to gather,
Okay.
and this signifies interactions that are based on commands given by a ruler
Okay.
to those under their authority. Think of things like, laws, edicts, and decrees.
So Lex is all about the rules and regulations that are kind of imposed by a governing power.
You got it.
Okay. Now, how do you think these three types of Inachus, Rex, and Lex connect back to this broader concept of natural law?
Well, I think they represent, different ways of creating order in the world.
Okay.
Ours seems like it's the most kind of aligned with the idea of natural law, since it's based on this, voluntary agreement and respect for individual autonomy.
That's a really good point. And it leads us to the next key distinction from the source, which is this difference between convivial order and social order.
Right.
Okay, listener, buckle up. We're going even deeper into the world of natural law and how it might apply to our lives.
Yeah.
What's the difference between these two types of order, and why should we care?
All right, well, convivial order, as the source describes it, is really about peaceful coexistence.
Okay.
It's a state where everyone respects each other's, natural rights.
Right.
Those things we talked about that are, inherently under our own control.
Right.
And it's built on that foundation of veris.
Okay.
Those mutual agreements, promises kept, commitments honored.
So convivial order, it sounds a bit like an ideal society. Yeah.
Where everyone gets along.
Right.
And respects each other's freedoms.
Uh-huh.
But is that really realistic? I mean, don't we need some degree of social order to function like as a larger society?
That's the key point, I think, that the source material makes.
Okay.
Convivial order isn't necessarily opposed to social order.
Okay.
They can coexist.
Right.
But there's a crucial distinction.
Okay.
Social order often involves, organizing for a common purpose, and that can involve hierarchy
Right.
and even coercion.
Okay.
Think about, governments, institutions,
Fair.
or even workplaces.
Right.
There's often a structure of authority and rules that go beyond, simple agreements between individuals.
Right.
This is where, those elements of rex and lex come into play.
So you're saying that you can have a society that's, organized and structured.
Yeah.
What we typically think of as social order.
Oh. But it needs to be done in a way that doesn't kind of trample on those fundamental natural rights that are at the heart of convivial order.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The source argues that, only certain types of societies are genuinely compatible with natural law.
Okay.
The ones that prioritize, respect for individual rights and don't rely too heavily on, force or coercion to maintain order.
That makes sense. You can have laws and leadership, but they shouldn't infringe on the basic freedoms and autonomy of the people.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? What do you think, listener? Where do you see this tension between convivial order and social order playing out in your own life? Maybe in your family, your workplace, or even in your community. It's fascinating to consider how these ideas kind of manifest in our everyday experiences.
Yeah, it really is. And speaking of challenges, the source material also dives into some common criticisms of natural law theory.
Right.
One that comes up a lot is the idea that natural law can't be real law because it doesn't have like a clear enforcement mechanism.
Right.
Like if I break a natural law, who's going to punish me? Nature, God.
Right. That's a question I've always struggled with when it comes to natural law, right?
Yeah.
It all sounds great in theory.
Yeah.
But who's actually making sure people follow these principles?
It's a common sticking point.
Right.
And it gets to the heart of the kind of the difference in perspective between, natural law theorists and legal positivists.
Right.
Positivists believe that a law, must have some concrete mechanism.
Right.
For punishment or enforcement to be meaningful.
Yeah.
But natural law theorists, see things differently.
Okay.
They argue that violating natural law can have consequences, even without, a human authority handing down a sentence.
So you're saying there's a built-in system of checks and balances within the natural order itself?
Yeah, that's the idea. The source points out that while disrespecting, natural law might sometimes seem profitable in the short term.
Yeah.
It ultimately leads to, disorder, conflict, and harm.
Okay.
Both for, individuals and society as a whole.
I'm starting to see how this all fits together. It's not about a divine being, striking down wrongdoers.
Right.
But about the inherent consequences that arise when we act in ways that contradict the natural order of things. Like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Actions have consequences, even if they aren't, immediate or obvious.
Precisely. And the source delves even deeper into this idea by examining how different thinkers throughout, history have interpreted and applied natural law principles. It mentions St. Augustine, who famously argued that an unjust law is no law at all.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. So even if a rule is technically part of a legal system, it's not truly legitimate if it goes against natural law.
That's the core argument of many natural law theorists.
Okay.
They believe that man-made laws should be, grounded in and consistent with the natural order.
Okay.
If they're not, then they kind of lose their moral authority.
That raises a really interesting question, though. Who gets to decide what's truly consistent with natural law?
Right.
It seems like there could be a lot of room for different interpretations, especially when you consider things like, cultural differences or religious beliefs.
You've hit on a point of contention.
Yeah.
And the source doesn't shy away from the complexities. It acknowledges that there can be disagreements about the specific implications of natural law.
Right.
Especially in areas like, religious beliefs, personal values, or even the definition of personhood.
So while there might be some gray areas, the core principles of natural law, those basic tenets about respecting human dignity and not infringing on fundamental rights, those should be universally applicable.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that there are certain actions,
Right.
like murder or theft,
Yeah.
that are inherently wrong
Yeah.
because they disrupt the natural order of human interaction.
You got it. And that's why the concept of natural law remains so relevant today.
Right.
Even in our complex world with its diverse societies and legal systems.
Uh-huh.
It offers a framework for understanding justice and morality
Okay.
that goes beyond just, the letter of the law and gets to the heart of what it means to be human.
Okay. So we've explored this idea of natural law as an order, not just a set of rules.
Right.
We've talked about natural persons, those capable of rational thought and action.
Mm-hmm.
Their inherent natural rights.
Right.
We've even delved into some criticisms and historical interpretations of natural law.
Mm-hmm.
But the source throws in one more twist.
Okay.
It distinguishes between natural law and something called artificial law.
Yes. This is where we start to see how those different ways of interacting that we talked about,
Okay.
Arius, Rex, and Lex, manifest in the creation of different types of order.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that not all systems of law are created equal.
Okay. Listener, I'm sensing another layer to this deep dive. What's the difference between natural law and this artificial law, and why should we care?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, artificial law, as the source material kind of lays it out, is essentially what we typically think of as the law.
The rules that are created and enforced by human authorities, and it fits primarily under that category of lex that we were talking about. Those commands issued from a ruler to those they govern.
Okay, that makes sense. I think most of us experience law as that set of rules that we have to follow to, avoid getting a ticket or ending up in court.
Right.
It's about obeying the authority of the government.
Exactly. But the source highlights a crucial difference between artificial law and natural law.
Okay.
Natural law is about avoiding punishment by some human authority. It's about recognizing and respecting an inherent order that exists regardless of what any government says or does.
So even if every government on Earth vanished tomorrow, natural law would still be in effect. That's a pretty radical idea.
It is radical because it suggests there are limits to what any government can legitimately do.
Right.
Even if a government creates a law that everyone agrees to follow, it's still not truly lawful if it violates those fundamental principles of the natural order.
I can see how that could be a controversial idea,
Yeah.
especially for people who believe in the power of government
Right.
to create a just and fair society. I mean, where do we draw the line between what's legal and what's truly lawful?
That's a question that's been debated for centuries.
Yeah.
The source uses a rather striking example, I think, to illustrate this point. The Roman Emperor Caligula, who supposedly declared his horse to be a senator.
Okay.
Of course, everyone knew a horse couldn't actually fulfill the duties of a senator.
Yeah.
But because Caligula held absolute power, his word became law, even if it went against all reason and common sense.
Yeah. So even though it was absurd on its face, it became legal because the emperor willed it so.
Exactly.
But even if every Roman citizen had gone along with it, it still wouldn't have aligned with natural law.
Precisely. And that's why natural law theorists emphasize the importance of distinguishing between what's legal meaning in accordance with the rules of a particular system, and what's lawful meaning aligned with those deeper principles of justice and right conduct that are rooted in the natural order.
It's like there's a higher standard of justice that goes beyond simply following the rules laid down by whoever happens to be in power.
Exactly, and that higher standard, according to natural law theory, comes from recognizing those inherent rights
Hmm.
that we talked about earlier, and acknowledging each individual as a free and rational being.
It circles back to those impellustrous relationships.
Right.
Right. Those interactions that are based on mutual agreement
Yeah.
and respect rather than simply, obedience to authority.
Exactly.
Now, the source introduces one more concept that I'm finding kind of intriguing, which is artificial persons.
Okay.
What are those, and how do they fit into this whole framework of natural law?
So artificial persons are entities that are treated as if they were persons,
Okay.
under a system of law,
Okay.
even though they aren't actually, individual human beings.
Okay.
A good example would be like a corporation.
Okay.
Right? A corporation can, own property,
Uh-huh.
enter into contracts, even, sue and be sued,
Right.
just like a real person.
Right.
But it exists only as a legal construct,
Okay.
not as a flesh and blood individual.
So it's like we've created these legal fictions
Yeah.
that have some of the same rights and responsibilities as real people. But how does that square with the idea of natural law, which seems to be so focused on the inherent rights of individual human beings?
That's a key point of tension, I think. The source material argues that this creation of artificial persons can lead to some tricky situations because the rules that apply to them
Right.
might not align with the principles of natural law
Okay.
that should, govern interactions between real human beings.
Like we've created these powerful entities that
Yeah.
can operate outside the bounds of natural justice
Mm.
because they aren't subject to the same constraints as individuals.
That's a concern raised by many natural law theorists.
Right.
They worry that the proliferation of artificial persons,
Right.
especially corporations, can erode individual rights
Right.
and concentrate power in the hands of a select few.
Right.
It disrupts that balance between convivial order and social order
Yeah.
that we were talking about.
This has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
We've explored this idea of natural law as an order,
Yeah.
not just a set of rules
Right.
and how it applies to individuals and their inherent rights.
Mhm.
We've even delved into some criticisms and
Yeah.
the historical evolution of these concepts.
Yeah.
But I think one of the most important takeaways is this distinction between natural law and artificial law,
Yeah.
and the implications that has for how we think about the role of government
Well-
and the structure of society.
I completely agree. And the source makes a strong case for recognizing the limits of artificial law and understanding that, true justice requires aligning our legal systems
Uh-huh.
with those fundamental principles of the natural order.
So, listener, what stands out to you from all of this? What will you be pondering as you go about your day? We've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
but I think the core message is this: natural law theory challenges us to think critically
Yeah.
about the systems that we live under.
Mm-hmm.
It encourages us to question assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
to look beyond the surface of the rules and
Yeah.
ask whether those rules truly serve the cause of justice
Yeah.
and respect for individual rights.
And even if you don't, embrace every aspect of natural law theory, it offers, I think, valuable tools for evaluating the world around us.
Okay.
It reminds us that there are certain fundamental truths about the human experience
Right.
that can't be ignored,
Yeah.
no matter how complex our societies or legal systems become.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of natural law.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope it's sparked some new ideas,
Yeah.
and encouraged you to keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
Absolutely.